and I work with the Paso Norte Health Foundation and Paso Norte Community Foundation and the DEC Plaza Foundation. And I'm really grateful to our Community Advisory Committee. We had our first meeting February 6th on Zoom as kind of an introduction orientation to the overall project and process of the feasibility study. Just as a reminder, the City of El Paso received the RAISE grant, $900,000. They were able to hire Stantec, who you met at the last meeting, who's been here all week, exploring our community, exploring this footprint and the neighborhoods around it, to share some thoughts and get feedback from our group. This evening, we have both staff from the City of El Paso who have been really fantastic, and a shout out to Joaquin, who you all know, and Daniela, I'm going to say it wrong. Daniela right, and then Alex Hoffman, if you don't know. So thank you so much to them. They have been really fantastic. And then also we have people in the room from the committee, and we have people online from the committee. So because we're not a really big group, I think we have a few minutes if we just do some introductions. So if you can just share with the group who you are.
My name is Manny Moreno, born and raised here in El Paso, except for a 4-year stint with the Marine Corps here in Vietnam, 1972. Been retired 10 years. I was the chief and senior engineer and engineering manager for the Boeing company here in town. And I love the city. So even though I've traveled all over the world, this is where I live and this is where I stay. Born in Chihuahuita, grew up in the Segundo Barrio, grew up in Lincoln, graduated from Jefferson, went to UTEP, electrical engineering degree, got my Webster's University master's in business.
Thank you, Manny. Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mo Flores. Hi, how are you? And my background is in providing investment advisory services, a licensed representative for about 21 plus years. And I'm also very active in the community and happy to support, learn more, see El Paso grow, and just happy to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo.
Hi, everybody. I am Gina, and I'll echo that. I too am excited to be part of the community. I am born and raised. I don't know where to look. I was born and raised here in El Paso. Went to Austin for 22 years, and am just back after being gone for 22 years. But I kept my kind of foot here in El Paso by producing a music festival, which was really exciting, and went on to produce 7 more across really Texas and 1 in Raleigh, North Carolina. I now work at El Paso Inc. And so really want to see this community do this. And so want to be part of this.
Thank you, Gina. Suzanne?
Hello, while I'm standing. I'm Suzanne Dipp. I'm a holdover from the uptown, downtown, I guess. Community involved in many ways. And I'm a business owner downtown, property owner, and also work with Civic Group, the Sunrise Civic Group in town.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Hector Reta, and I'm here because of my association with the Paso Norte Community Foundation. I'm not a native, but I married El Paso. I feel like I married El Paso 13 years ago, and I've been here ever since then.
Thank you, Hector. And Hector's one of our past board chairs, so we're really grateful for his participation in this.
Charlie and Tebby, a small business owner. Our office is on Wyoming and Cotton, on the Current Place Association board, and on the PSB also.
Thank you. We'll go online. We have Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Block. I am with Pearl Properties. We own and manage offices and apartments downtown in other parts of El Paso. I'm also a native El Pasoan who returned about 12 years ago, lived in New York, Santiago, Chile, went to college in Austin, Hookham. I'm also here. I'm here as myself, but I'm also vice president of the El Paso Apartment Association. But tonight I'll just be representing my own views. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Angelica? She may have
Right.
Oh, there she is.
Angelica Rodriguez. Also a native of Pasawan, lived all over Texas and on both coasts. I'm a resident of Sunset Heights, and that's how I'll be representing myself too, but I'm also the president of the EPISD Council of PTAs. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And anyone else online not from the city? Jorge Reyes? Okay. All right, so oh yes, great, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I've been having audio difficulties, but yes, I'm George Reyes. I'm here on behalf of El Paso County Planning and Development. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so as you know, we started the process with Men's Collaborative, who reached out to multiple stakeholders to have individual interviews, conversations about the project, and then also partnered with Martin Bartlett at Consor Engineering. And so I'm going to ask, they're going to just cover these two first processes that kind of got us to today. And so I'll turn it over to Zach Lockram, who many of you met with MEND. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Lockram. I'm with MEND Collaborative. I was on the previous CAC meeting and gave a little summary of the work that we had done interviewing stakeholders all the way on the spectrum from we were the first people telling them about this project to folks that have been really involved for years and really working to understand more some of the community sentiment and how we can really help to make sure that the community voice is heard in moving forward this idea of the project. So I gave a little more full report out last time at the previous CAC, but I was in town to help out with some of the public engagement. So I wanted to come by and put the face to the name instead of always being virtual. We did finalize a memo that summarized the interviews as well. If you participated in the interviews, that was emailed back to you earlier today, but it's also online for everybody, for anyone else who would like to kind of see that summary as well. So, and I'll turn it over to Martin to talk about the engagement this week.
Thank you very much, Zach. As Zach mentioned, my name is Martin Bartlett. I'm from the Strategic Planning and Communications team at Consor Engineers based here in the El Paso office. I want to talk a little bit about the public engagement opportunities that we had over the past couple of days. Saw several CAC board members there, was really happy to see many of you there. We appreciate you coming out. Just a reminder of what our strategy was. Our strategy was to make sure that we were very geographically distributed across town within the confines of what we could schedule. So you see we were there on the east side at EPPD Pebble Hills Regional Command on Monday. On Tuesday, we were on the west side. And then last night from 4:30 to 6:30, we were here in this space and had a really good turnout for members of the community. So here you see us kind of hard at work talking to folks from kind of the surrounding east side and Mission Valley area. We had a good turnout from the east side and Mission Valley at Pebble Hills Regional Command. Then on the west side on Tuesday, we had a very good turnout. Charlie, thank you for joining us as well. On Tuesday out on the west side of the regional command, had a good turnout there. Again, we didn't put a photo on this one because you have to use your imagination because you're in the exact space. So just kind of squint your eyes and imagine this room full of people providing their feedback on the project. So a little bit about the attendance breakdown. Started out with 21 folks joining us on the east side, pumped it up a little bit to 22 on the west side. Then we really had a great turnout last night, 45 folks who came out and spent some time with us yesterday evening. For people who weren't able or weren't interested in coming to those in-person public engagement opportunities, we have the website downtowndeckplaza.org that mimics many of the public engagement opportunities that we've had in person. There were some major themes that we started to hear, and it was really interesting as we were having our conversations. One thing that came up over and over again, and Pierre's going to go into this in much more detail in a minute, but just we kept hearing about shade and green space and planting, vendor spaces, food trucks, performance spaces. We also heard from people about this idea of being excited about the reconnection of neighborhoods. We've talked a lot about that as one of the reasons that this project could be so successful, but we actually heard from the community organically that that was something that was very interesting to them. Another item we heard was about the uniqueness of El Paso. We heard over and over again, make sure this is something that works for El Paso, that is uniquely kind of flavored with that El Paso flavor that we all know and love. We heard a lot of really exciting feedback and positive feedback, but we did hear some questions that kept coming up over and over again. And so we think it's valuable to kind of share those with the group. There was a lot of concern about how pedestrians would interact with the space, this idea of how will I get to this space? Will it just be an island in the middle of in the middle of streets, or will it be something that's a little bit more pedestrian friendly? We also heard a lot of questions about what the ultimate transportation improvements that the state is actually undertaking would look like. We were very kind of clear with folks who asked us those questions that ultimately questions about the TxDOT project weren't questions we could really answer at this point, but really kind of referred them on to TxDOT if they had any questions about what those ultimate transportation improvements might look like. And then we heard the question that I think is not surprising that we heard. What is the mechanism to fund construction of this? How will it be operated and maintained if and when construction is complete? So again, we're at the very beginning of the public involvement phase. Right now, we are in that February-March window, visioning and hearing public feedback. The alternatives preparation will begin in the next couple of, over March and April. And then in April, we'll be back to the community to present some of those alternatives to show them the output of their public feedback and their public comment. Yes, I think Zach has one quick note.
And I just want to also just add in that, I think one of the real opportunities for those of you on the advisory committee, all of you do represent various groups. You have voices to be able to bring people into the engagement as well. I wanted to pitch heavily that there is an interactive map on the website that allows people to come in and really drop in engagement. And we've started to see some people starting to really utilize that tool particularly, but that's something that for those who are willing to sort of share on their own channels, if you do have channels to share, Martin would be able to help also provide you materials or language that could go on social media or in emails as well for that.
Thank you, Zach. And that actually does wrap up my section on public engagement. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pierre Chaco from Stantec to give you an update on the work they've been doing. That I think is the meat of the meeting and what we're most excited to hear tonight.
I'm recording. Yep.
Thank you, Martin, and good evening, everyone. Just to reintroduce myself, Pierre Chaco, I think I met many of you at our last Community Advisory Committee meeting, along with one of my colleagues, David Dixon, who's not here with us today. But I also have with me Maggie Connor, who is our urban design team lead for this phase of this project and has played a pretty critical role in the last week. Along with myself and Maggie, we had 4 other colleagues from Stantec who've now returned home, who've been working pretty feverishly over the last 3 days. And it's been an exercise of learning and exploring mostly. And so what you're going to be seeing today is the results of that. So we're kind of, in the spirit of transparency, we kind of want you to look over our shoulders and look at some of the raw results of what we've been doing in the last few days. So before we jump right into it, I want to re-present to you a couple of slides that you saw last time. These were slides that David Dixon, my colleague, would have presented to you. And this sort of summarizes our starting point for this project. Something that we've actually, it's kind of like the theme that was featured in the public open houses, that in many respects, we're trying to look at this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Yes, it has its challenges, but it's a really unique opportunity to create a unique place for all people who live in El Paso, something that really reflects the local culture and heritage, that reconnects neighborhoods, provides economic opportunity, and actually creates a shared sense of community in what everyone looks at as a binational region. So this is sort of the broad starting point for us. The other thing that we talked to you about last time is that this is about public space. And there are some commonly understood features that make great public spaces. And these are applicable almost everywhere. And our task is actually to take these ideas and make them local, right? So we're starting with the idea that to actually have a successful public space, we need people. It's also about programming and activities that attract people. It's a great deal about design and attention to design, sometimes to details, that can actually make the difference between a successful place and one that's not so successful. And that ultimately results in what we call placemaking, which is results in creating a place where people want to be and want to linger. So with that general background, Zach and Martin talked to you a little bit about some of the activities over the last 2-3 days. In these 3 days that we've kind of looked at as a workshop, a series of workshop activities. It started with a public open house. There were several of them. There were 3 of them on 3 successive days. And so we've been listening to that input. You see over, those of you who are not in the room, there's a couple of boards here with blue, pink, green, and yellow faces that you can actually see the input that we received, quite a wealth of input. And so we've been digesting that. We also had a site visit where we walked through and around the site and really kind of understood some of the challenges that we face in turning that, what is right now the sort of a place that nobody wants to linger and hardly anybody walks, into something that is truly an attractive place. We've also had a programming focus group. Several of you took the time to come and spend some one-on-one time with us, and we allowed us to pick your brain on ideas about how to make this space something that has something in it for everyone. We really value that input, because those of you who are local, who are involved with local organizations that do programming, that are involved in using public spaces, gave us some really good input. And then I also want to emphasize that we had a very good kickoff meeting with TxDOT, with some representatives from TxDOT. At the back of the room, you can take a look at it, and those of you who are virtual, just know that we've got a whole bunch of drawings we prepared before we came here, where we studied the alternatives that TxDOT has on the table, primarily the alternative I and alternative D. We started looking at sections of them. We also did some work on benchmarks of examples from other places that have been successful or not so successful. And so we came into town with lots of questions. And at our meeting with TxDOT, the most rewarding thing about it was that a lot of our questions were answered, and with answers that actually gave us a lot of room for exploration, because we were concerned coming in that we were going to be having to design this with our hands tied behind our back to some extent. But we were very pleasantly surprised and feel very optimistic going forward that we can work collaboratively with TxDOT through this process. We also had a meeting with a technical committee that consisted of multiple departments of the city, as well as other agencies that in one form or other are going to be impacted or may have responsibilities associated with this venture. And so it was really good to meet them, and we invited them also into our workspace, where they were looking over our shoulders while we were working, asking questions, giving feedback. And so we found that also very useful. So the net result of all of that is we've been drawing on sketch paper with markers and making handwritten notes. So we're going to show you some of those results. Some of it is half-baked, some of it is not fully thought through. But that's the form in which we'd like to kind of get your feedback on today. So one of the things we've done is, this is our first attempt at taking the wealth of information we've been receiving, including from these public meetings the last 3 days, and kind of gel them into our second iteration of thinking about goals. And we've kind of boiled them down to 6 ideas at this point, or targets that we'd like to shoot towards. The first one being an authentic cultural crossroads or a common ground for El Paso. The second being creating an inviting sense of place, a place where people have a reason to go there and to linger, and also to create enhanced connectivity and accessibility. And this means in making it easy and convenient for people to get here no matter where they're coming from. It could be a regional audience, it could be people from within 3 blocks. So there's a variety of ways in which people will be getting to this place. And so we've been trying to think about how we can be successful in promoting that accessibility. We also are going to be looking at inclusive economic development. A big part about this venture, in order to make it feasible and viable, is going to be about its economic development potential. But we want to do it in a way that benefits a broad range of people, locally adjacent as well as the whole region. Cutting edge sustainability is a theme we heard quite a bit. I know that El Paso is venturing on a climate action plan, that we heard a lot of feedback from folks about being sensitive to climate and the unique climate that El Paso has. And then last but not least, implementation feasibility. You saw that echoed in one of the concerns that Martin showed you on the slide. That is something that really starts happening towards the end of our process, but we've begun to wrap our minds around it. I should mention that besides myself and my colleagues from Stantec, we also had key team members from HRNA, who are our market and financial feasibility analysis experts. So they came to town with us today, and they also spent a lot of time talking to people and sharing some of their initial understandings, getting feedback from many people who understand the market locally, so that, you know, at this stage, they too had more questions than answers, but they learned a great deal that's going to help the process. So with that, starting with that idea of those goals, at this point, I'm going to ask Maggie to come forward, and we're going to tag team through this presentation to start showing you some of the results of what we've been thinking about.
Good evening. So I wanted to hit on a couple of points before I even get into the drawings we're about to show. The first thing Pierre hinted at, and I think Martin hinted at it as well, we are at this very crucial point of inflection in our process where we've gone from sort of analyzing and trying to really understand the problem at hand, or the design problem, into testing alternatives. And so we are, as Martin had outlined, we've got the next 2 months to continue to flesh these out. And so I think it is really important that you all understand these are sort of fresh off the boards. And the reason that we do this at this point is because this is the best time to course correct and to understand if we're missing something, or if we're on the right track, or if we're veering a little off course. So I think that's a really important goal for us for tonight, is to kind of check some of these assumptions and some of these directions. The second thing that was very interesting is the very first task that we had here in town this week was to do a site visit. And we walked from City 2 over to the highway and experienced that whole process of walking from downtown, walking over the bridges, the impact of the noise of the highway, which I think was most shocking to some of us for whom it was the first time experiencing that, was how loud and aggressive and hostile that site is. We walked down Yandle. We began to understand the connections into the other communities surrounding us, and then came back and started drawing with that context in mind. And I think one of the first reactions we had is, oof, how do we overcome this environment? And certainly the deck helps that. But we wanted to pull back a bit and look at how we sit in this context. And I think what's interesting is in this whole conversation, we've been talking a lot about I-10 and what TxDOT is doing. But I kind of want to take us to the built environment of El Paso. And this is literally, it's a drawing called a figure ground, and these are just the building footprints. And what's really striking to me when we look at a drawing like this, I'm going to get the laser pointer here, is that it's very clear where I-10 has cut through your community. And not only can you see the trench where that has happened, but you can see where the building fabric on either side has been eroded. And that's sort of reflected, I think, in how it feels around there, where you have this kind of blasted out, eroded building fabric immediately adjacent to the highway. And what we know is that for as long as I-10 has been there, the buildings around it have been treating it like a back door. This is not something that you want to address. This is not a sort of a plaza or a garden, but rather something to back up to. And so in this diagram, what we start to show is where all of the blank facades and sort of backs of buildings exist, both here on the south side of Wyoming and on the north side of the I-10 corridor. But you can see throughout the town where we have blank walls versus the red dots where we have entries. And what that tells me is that one of our challenges is going to be, how do we turn this from a back, something that both sides of the highway are backing up to, into something that is now a front yard, if you will, for everybody around it. So when we think about relating to the context, that gives us a couple of cues. of things that we want to embed into this whole deck process. The first is there's a real opportunity here, as many have already stated, and I think has come strongly through the public engagement on the deck to fill in some of those missing teeth and gaps. We begin to see how we can take this 3,000-foot long deck plaza and begin to think of it in its programmable spaces, and begin to think about how that directly relates to its context. So for example, we see areas here in the far west that are really about connecting to the neighborhood. We see this sort of middle zone where we're near the institutions of being about institutional spaces. Maybe this is some of the bigger festival programming can go in this area and really relate to those uses. And then as we get down again into kind of connecting to communities, really providing the kind of services and amenities that people who live and work around this area require. And all the while, this is still maintaining its sort of regional draw. Joel Joel Mann, for those of you who've met him, either through this process or the downtown uptown process, his focus has really been on mobility, and he's sort of at the beginning of his exploration. And I think even as Pierre and I were walking over here tonight, he was still sending us more sketches. So just, our work does not stop today. We of course keep moving. But there were some initial things, especially on this bigger framework scale that we're looking at, that Joel had pointed out that I think are important opportunities. The first are looking at the bike connections and the opportunities to link those down through into the deck plaza. For example, the Stanton Street, extending that into the plaza area. We are looking pretty strongly at El Paso as a connection for bike and pedestrians. I'll talk a bit later. I saw the comment about people being worried about how pedestrians were going to interact with the park, or with the deck plaza, excuse me. And I think that this is one of those opportunities where we have a really clear connection, and the same by using that Prospect Street connection over here. Another thing that we observed is that Oregon is a street that has all of the transit facilities already in it, and we think there's a great opportunity to look at some kind of transit center engaged with the deck plaza that could really invite people to find different ways to get to the deck and to access it. We also think that that kind of facility is another way that we can incorporate some of these other things that people have asked for, which includes shade structures, revenue generating spaces where we could have kiosks or places that people can run businesses. Additionally, things that can act as, could cool you in the summer and generally make it more pleasant to be in this deck plaza. So those are some of our big picture moves. Looking more closely, we have begun this week, when we think about feasibility, I think we have to sort of understand what the options are, where, we've identified generally what our study area is, but as we get and look at it at this scale, we're really trying to understand where exactly is the deck and what can we build on it? What can we build adjacent to it? What will it hold? How do these programmatic elements affect it? And then we also do have to be aware that TxDOT's plans for I-10 are going to directly impact how you would move forward with this project. And so we want to be sure that that the result of our effort is to prepare for all of the possible configurations that may exist. While at the same time, because I think as Pierre had mentioned, we had very good collaborative engagements with TxDOT, I think while at the same time also being able to give them good feedback about what's important and how we set this up to be a very successful outcome for El Paso. So we looked primarily at three different options. Option one is loosely based on the TxDOT alternative D, which I'll go into in some detail. Option two is more or less related to alternative I's alignment. And then option three is a bit of a hybrid of both. And I think through that, we cover a lot of alternatives that may exist moving forward coming from TxDOT. So looking first at the concept framework number 1, what this does is TxDOT's alternative D really looks at keeping I-10 within the same trench. And what that allows is the properties that run between I-10 and Yandle to be retained in their current location. And then this alternative also maintains the El Paso street grid. So you'll see us showing that in a lot of these alternatives, the retention of our north-south connections through here, with some alternatives and some prioritization of these roads as we move forward. But right now, this is what we are exploring, and it is evident in the TxDOT alternative D. For these diagrams, you'll see a concept that we've been referring to as terra firma, which is as we begin to look at where the deck plaza may be, there's a portion of it that is above the highway. And so that is going to be on deck structure. And that will have its own kind of cost impacts and limitations on how deep planting can go, how big of a structure you can put on it. But in all cases, what we're finding is that they're, especially sort of looking at the TxDOT alternatives, there are these things that they call, it's almost remnants, which is leftover land that is in various configurations. We've been trying to wrangle it, but that is on firm ground. And so we're starting to see where we can capture that with the deck plaza, and it'll give us a broader range of options of what we can do there. So whether that is deeper tree planting or landscaping, whether it's screening, whether it's taller or more substantial buildings that can work with the deck plaza programming. So in this first alternative, like I said, the existing parcels can remain. And so we've started to sketch what that may look like. And in these, what we've done is we're showing the deck plaza in this green tone, which is not to say that this is all open space, but this is all of the programmable deck plaza space. And one of the things that we're really interested in as we look at this from an urban design perspective is understanding where we can improve the frontage. You'll recall the drawing I showed earlier where we had a lot of backs of buildings facing Wyoming. So we're looking at where we can improve that frontage and perhaps fill in some of these missing teeth. And then on the north side along Yandell, we have sort of existing fronts here. There are some opportunities for some infill buildings that can help improve the connections to the park or to the plaza. And then we have the existing development that's on the south side of Yandell here, represented here. Now, in their current form, a couple of things. We would need to look at sort of screening of the backs to make sure that we have a good transition from them to the deck plaza. And then obviously be looking at the grades because we have quite a bit of topography here, which is wonderful. I think it's a great asset for design. We looked at if at some point these properties were to redevelop, or if for some reason the TxDOT roadworks made it impossible for these to be retained. We also did study some alternatives for what that could look like. And this can happen at any point. What we're trying to represent here is that there's an opportunity for these to be built in such a way that they can face onto the deck park and provide good solid frontage. Whether it happens here or it happens here or it happens on any of these blocks, there's the opportunity to expand deck park programming, perhaps all the way to Yandell, and that can happen in any configuration. Additionally, some of the buildings, like for example, the Holocaust Museum, maybe with a facelift on its south and west sides, could remain right there and linked to the park. So there's a lot of flexibility. I think both of these options sort of illustrate how there's a lot of room to work there. Next, we look at the framework number 2. In this one, what has happened is TxDOT's alternative I, because of the geometry of their lanes and some of the things that are happening downstream on either side, The orientation of the TxDOT trench moves north, and it puts it more sort of smack dab in the middle of this zone. In their version, they had moved Yandle and Wyoming to be right next to the highway deck. And our sort of counter proposal to that for them is why not look at keeping Wyoming and Yandle in their current alignment so that we can maximize the area between those two streets and really claim that as part of this deck plaza zone. And so again, that concept of terra firma, what that gives us is that gives us a liner of land on each side that you could have greater flexibility with what you can actually build there. As a way to think about how to either screen some of these back doors on the south side or a way to introduce different kind of structures and different facilities into this plaza. So a way that could look in this configuration, you see we still are filling in the missing teeth on the south side here, but for example, like where the West Star Tower went in, you know, that's a back blank facade that runs along Wyoming. You know, so maybe, for example, some of the programming that we've heard of for the park are, you know, desire for things like a farmer's market stalls or kiosks or the kinds of spaces that people could rent or could you know, do business out of. We talked about the idea of a transit facility along Oregon. You know, that could rest here. There are some opportunities to generate some revenue to help with the ongoing maintenance and management of the deck plaza. In this alternative, we're showing that maybe El Paso doesn't go through as a vehicular connection, but you would have full bike and pedestrian connections signalized at these roads, so that you could imagine maybe a larger space for a big event space. If you wanted to fill in, imagine a regional draw that could exist along here. And we'll talk more about programming as we move forward. The third alternative does much the same at the north part of this as alternative number 2. It's still looking at that I configuration for I-10. But in this one, we've allowed Wyoming to run up right next to the highway trench. And in this way, we get a liner depth along the southern buildings that would allow us to reface those with some form, maybe some form of mixed use development. We've talked about the food culture here, opportunities for things that maybe could include shared kitchens, and HRNA is working through some of the program opportunities that exist. But again, we still get that terra firma at the north end, so we can see some opportunities to develop there or to build good park structures there. And so when we look at that in an urban design form, we're still getting good mixed-use development around the park, but we get this nice liner here at the south facing Wyoming and really enhancing that streetscape. And then the idea that we can begin to reinforce these north-south connections with what one of my colleagues has coined parkitecture for different kinds of park structures that can find their way into this place. And, you know, in places here near Kansas, where the terra firma expands, you could imagine buildings that really kind of enhance that edge. And then just as a diagram over top, as we start to transition into some of the programming. Oh,
Go back.
yeah, sure.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think
Yeah, please.
Maggie talked about the north-south connections, but one of the important types of conversations we've been having with TxDOT this past week is about how to look at the street network adjacent to the park differently from the way we might look at a feeder road, for example, normally. So we've been thinking about, you know, if this space is going to be as successful as we want it to be, it's one where you would expect to see a lot of people walking around, a lot of bikes. And so that means the way the street operates, whether it's crossing the deck or running parallel to it on north and south. Basically, we're really trying to push the envelope with TxDOT. And so far, they've been very amenable to that conversation of how we can change the nature and the operation of those people.
To further to that, I opted not to include my, probably one of the worst trace drawings I've ever done, but basically traced out the streets that currently exist in the El Paso grid to suggest to TxDOT that when you're on this level, when you're on the deck plaza level, you should just feel like you're in the city and all remnants of I-10 should disappear, right? That's the goal of this. And then I-10 can exist, we sort of joked, in the underworld below the plaza. The other thing that, just to carry on what Pierre was saying, is we talk about those north-south connections, something that emerged in the conversations with TxDOT, in fact, that we, of course, decided to pick up that ball and run with it, is that they were looking at traffic calming on Yandell and Wyoming. And in doing so, they had included the idea of raised intersections at Santa Fe and at Mesa as a way to traffic calm and keep cars from flying down those feeder roads, which is excellent. And I don't think I've ever had a DOT official or a representative even suggest it. But along the conversation or the questions that people had about how pedestrians could interact with this deck plaza, this is one of those opportunities that I think could really enhance access to these pads. Specifically here at Mesa and at Santa Fe, we thought if these intersections are raised, it might be lovely to continue that at deck height so that this felt like all one common plane through here, which I think could be a really strong form. And that would really help connect. So for example, at Santa Fe, really help connect this linkage back up to Prospect Street. And then what we're showing here is that in addition to all of the kind of connections that would exist through those individual decks, we are also proposing, or we would like to see and continue to propose, a very robust and generous sidewalk pedestrian connections at the edges. There are provisions for cycle track, as I had told you earlier in that mobility diagram, and the idea that this is really reinforcing that. And then I'm going to turn it over. Pierre's going to talk a little bit more about the goals and metrics and talk a bit about how we'll begin to measure these alternatives.
And Maggie will be jumping in as needed as well. Yeah, so at the start of the presentation, I talked about the 6 goals that we preliminarily identified. And we're not going to dwell on the details here, but we just wanted to give you a preliminary sense about how these goals are intended to lead to metrics that kind of give you an inkling of things that are going to guide the design of our alternatives. So for example, when we talk about an authentic cultural crossroads, there's elements that we want to try to hit, like symbolism, heritage, contemporary culture, and the things that help make a common ground. Inviting a sense of place, the active edges that you heard Maggie talk about, the amenities and programming and the variety of those are going to be important. Shade, safety, noise mitigation. And then when it comes to enhanced accessibility and connectivity, clearly there's several modes of transportation that we need to think about. You heard Maggie talk about some of that. Walkability, ADA access, bikeability, transit access, vehicle access as well. And then important to think about the street grid and the continuity of the urban street grid and what that means in terms of connectivity and linkages. And then last but not least, the notion of parking, which is an important component of any mobility, particularly people who are coming from afar. So that'll be part of what we'll be thinking of. And then going on that theme, inclusive economic development, about engaging local businesses, local institutions, and also thinking about whenever there's redevelopment, there's concerns about displacement and working towards minimizing that. We heard some really strong feedback about sustainability and climate action, the importance of native planting, water conservation, heat island reduction. And then lastly, when it comes to implementation, constructability from an engineering standpoint, infrastructure compatibility and dealing with some of the things that you don't see that are below grade that you have to handle. Alignment with TxDOT as they are moving in what we hope will be a parallel process with what we're doing. and the coordination associated with that. TxDOT has certain traffic capacity thresholds that we have to be mindful of so that they can meet the objectives of their project. And then, again, last but not least, cost is going to be a key factor that we'll be studying. And as sort of related to cost and feasibility, exploring the notion of phasing and how we deal with that. So I won't dwell on this a whole lot, but we've been taking those metrics and starting to think about how they affect design elements, particularly as it relates to public open space planning. And so this diagram talks about some of those types of elements that inform the activities we plan for on the deck to create a sense of place, to provide opportunities for recreation, things that can enhance the environment and support sustainability, things that would ensure safety for all users. And then lastly, mobility, how the design elements in the public space can enhance mobility and connectivity and accessibility. So, and I'm going to ask Maggie to jump in here, but I'm going to make a first stab at it. But when Maggie talked about the context and how the surroundings will inform how we think about the space, this diagram is beginning to get a handle on that. You know, starting from the west side, in proximity to Sunset Heights, between Prospect and Santa Fe, you begin to think about that space. That also happens to be the most elevated section of this corridor, where you would have the opportunity for vistas and views. We're calling it Sunset Gardens because you could view the sunset from there. But it also creates an opportunity for botanical gardens, terraces, strolling, as well as some iconic features. And then as you move towards the east, the larger activity space that we're kind of calling the lawn, that doesn't mean it's necessarily grass, but it's sort of a public lawn that allows for a much wider variety of events, music, performances, things of that nature, as well as things like kiosks and cafes. And then on the eastern edge of it, where Oregon bisects the public space, as Maggie pointed out, there's an opportunity to kind of create a transit plaza, if you will, fairly central to the whole space, where it happens to be on a transit-rich corridor and allows for greater accessibility via transit. It also kind of creates interesting opportunities around the transit stop for kiosks and activities, potentially revenue-generating activities too. And then as you start moving further east, that's the area where you start getting closer to both existing residential neighborhoods, but also opportunities for attracting new residents through development. And so that starts becoming more of a neighborhood serving space. You could think of it as a backyard for homes where you begin to have smaller activities, including places where people could just meet and hang out. It could serve not only the residential neighborhood, but also the daytime working population during lunch hour, a good place where people come and grab lunch, where you might have food trucks and things like that. And it's also a place where you could have smaller, active, recreational activities. You know, think of things like futsal or table tennis or things like that, where people could have interactive activities that you would typically do in your neighborhood park, right? And then as you start moving further east, the next space is one that we're calling rent-a-space events, where you could have smaller rentable activities, whether, that's a place where you might consider providing opportunities for private events, whether it be a wedding or a quinceañera, things of that nature. So those types of activities, but there's a whole wide range of possibilities there. And then as you then get to the eastern end of it, it then starts going back to the concept that we had on the west side, where here you can think of it maybe as the Sunrise Gardens, where there's opportunities for public art that's very local to El Paso, but also more of a quiet space where local neighborhood residents could hang out. Did I miss anything, Maggie?
No, that was it. I think the big notion is, as we're testing this, again, the idea of how those things relate to the properties that are on either side of them, how they position themselves to be good regional draws. I think one of the big, again, highlights that we keep thinking is, how does this feel great when you have the entire city of El Paso hanging out there for an event? but how does it also feel really good on a Tuesday afternoon when you want to go there with your book and have a coffee or have a late lunch? So, I mean, we want to kind of balance that. And I think looking at these sort of character areas along the length of that are a way to do that. And so everybody can kind of see themselves at different places in that plaza.
So along those themes, just to give you a visual sense of what we're talking about with Sunset Gardens, imagine something like this. It's very much drawing from local planting that could be sustainable. But it's a place where you would have strolling paths, botanical gardens, terraces, taking advantage of the topographic changes, an opportunity for overlooked iconic elements as well. And then what we call the Great Lawn. These are the kinds of things you'd see. Opportunities for integrating water in a sustainable way. Large event spaces. That area is going to be the largest contiguous section that we could potentially have on the space. It also is close to the cultural center and the civic center. So very compatible for event planning for larger events. And then the area that we're calling backyard or 9 to 5, these kinds of activities, you can see some small scale sporting activities, residents hanging out or people grabbing lunch at a food truck, as well as kind of an informal meeting space. And you can kind of think of that as a outdoor meeting that somebody has. And then the rent space location, provide variety of types of activities, as I mentioned, using water again to create attractive places, a variety of spaces that can be rented out for private events, things like group fitness activities, again, something that's compatible with nearby residents. And then lastly, the art garden, in contrast to maybe the one on the western end, more sculptural elements and artistic elements, possibly inspired by nature. And then being on the eastern edge, also possibly for an overlook. And I've got a few question marks there because we're still thinking and we're open to feedback as well. Wanted to sort of end on the notion of revenue generation, because as Maggie's been talking through this, you can see there's a large expanse of space. And we all know that there are feasibility questions that we have to explore through this process. So a key part of what we're going to be looking at is a variety of ways in which we can find revenue generation opportunities that can help support a successful place like this. So it can take many forms. These are the kinds of activities that could potentially generate revenue from the smaller scale, from food carts to large events that could raise revenue, to food trucks, to private events, to larger, more temporary structures that could support retail activities, to outdoor rentable space as well. So now this is not the only form in which revenue could be generated. Maggie was walking you through examples where there could be development activity immediately adjacent to the deck. But you could also think about that on a larger scale, within a quarter mile to a half mile around the deck. There is likely, if we are successful, to be able to attract over time development opportunities that you could think of ways that some of that value can be captured to help support the deck in the long term. So revenue generation is a key part of it. We haven't really started digging into that. Our partner, HRNA, has been charged with helping us with that. And some of the ideas that we've generated during this past week are going to lead to more detailed work where we'll be sitting with them and they're going to be pushing back on certain things and second guessing things as they continue to do analysis. And a key part of their role is to not only assess the market, but also to think about where there are realistic opportunities for value capture, so that ultimately when we are able to identify a viable option to study further in phase 2 of this process, they will start getting into some of the nitty gritty of that, of thinking about a pro forma of how it could make business. So with that brings us to the end of our formal presentation. And I do want to encourage you, we really appreciate your You're kind of looking over our shoulder while we are thinking about this. It's still early days. So nothing that you saw today is written in stone yet. It's literally all drawn on paper. You can very easily change it. And so we would like to hear what you think, so any kind of feedback, things that you saw that tells us that we're on the right track, things that you think we're headed in the wrong direction on, or if there's something that's missing, would all be very helpful for us. So with that, I just want to encourage you all as well, both those of you who are attending virtually, as well as those of you in the room. Really like to hear from you. Yeah, starting with you.
So something that I'm hearing from people I'm talking to is the idea of safety. The idea, structurally, is it going to hold up? If there's a collapse, what about safety under? So I think that would make certain people feel better knowing, having safety, perhaps.
And that's excellent. From our tour of the site, that's something that was very much front of mind, because if you walk there right now, you don't feel safe. And I suspect that a lot of the perceptions and concerns about safety are derived from that, because today it's not a safe space, right? So absolutely, that's something we need to think about.
It is interesting, though. I think reinforcing the idea of safety underneath as well as over top, right? It's sort of both.
That's right.
Is a move forward. So, I thought we had started to collect that in the metrics, but I think that's an important one to make sure we gather. Great. Other thoughts? Did we get anything right? Did we get it wrong? Are we missing something critical? Yes.
Every Thursday, there's a group of gentlemen that I get with. We meet and we try to solve the world's problems. They're all professionals and everything. We solve them one week and solve them again this next week. And I've been bringing up this issue about the downtown Plaza. And there's 4 things that they keep bringing up. In fact, we talked about it this morning. One is that make sure that whatever gets designed does not impact congestion that we currently have in I-10 here in this area here. We want more lanes so that traffic can move and we diminish smog and all the noise that comes with it. That's one. The other one is that parking. You start parking in the neighborhoods and the neighborhoods are going to get out of whack. You see it at the high schools, you see it at all this. So there's got to be adequate parking. The other thing is pet access. And having traveled all the U.S. and everything else, El Paso is way behind when it comes to pet access. They don't recognize there's a lot of us that are retired. We got pets. We want to walk our dogs, take them to the restaurants. And you go to Albuquerque, you go to Santa Fe, you go to other cities, and they're a lot more advanced than we are when it comes to pet access. So something that we could walk pets, maybe a very small dog park or something like that. And then the last thing that come up is, how do we keep it from becoming a tent city for the homeless? That's happening everywhere. Anaheim?
If I can, just for the recording, would one of you mind kind of repeating the statements?
Yep.
Into the mic too? Sorry about that.
Can I take an attempt? Is that all right? So he said 4 things that have been coming up in conversations with some of his peers. The first one being that whatever is designed doesn't impact congestion on I-10, so
Worse.
or make it worse. The second is parking, making sure that parking is addressed, especially for some of the larger events. It's not the first time we've heard that. And in fact, if Joel were here, he probably would have done a much better job of explaining on the mobility front the idea of looking at kind of a district parking resource and understanding how to plug that in. Pet access, that's great. We sort of casually on our team had been talking about, that idea of the lawn as like the front yard. I know somebody had said, this idea of this deck plaza being the welcome mat for El Paso, so we sort of took it into a front yard, and then like the front yard where where you welcome people in, and then maybe the backyard is where you sit down and, have a game, have a talk, that's where you and your buddies can have you solve your world's problems. And you can bring your dogs down for for that. So pet access, and then finally just, how do we homelessness is a huge problem or a concern, obviously, for the people who are unhoused. But how do we manage that with the deck plaza in the future? They do okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great.
So I am really excited by this. I think you guys got a lot of things right. So much from, the walking past the big lawn area, which is obviously the area that I'm most excited about, and the other spaces that you designed there. I think also I want to echo on the safety part. One of the things that we always looked at in festivals was vehicle penetration all around. So how is that going to be prevented as well? Like how will vehicles be prevented from entering into the park space, as well as, aerial space? How is that going to be protected as well? Or what are we looking at around, Unfortunately, we have to think about active shooters, and that was something, that I worked with in that space. And, how are we looking at that, and how are we making sure that people don't have access to buildings or, things like that, as well as drones, right? Like drones, I think, is something that we're seeing a lot of now. And are there going to be drone flying spaces? Is it going to be accessible to things like that? But that, that was one of the things that I thought of when I looked at those things. And, being a parent to a 5-year-old, having a massive playscape would be the ideal dream. I did not see something like that there. I don't know if I missed it or, if it was, I've seen images of it, but I didn't see it specifically kind of drawn out into one space. But I think that is, would be ideal for a parent. And you had a lot of really great stuff for the big lawn space. I'd love to at some point dive into more of that. Like, can we put a power grid there for festivals? That's always really an important thing. Is there access to water there? That's also a really important thing. When festivals are happening, you have to have water and whatnot. Yeah. Restrooms is also, I haven't seen, obviously we haven't gone into the nitty gritty of things, but this was really exciting and something that I am, looking forward to see how it continues to develop.
Those are great. First of all, great feedback. Thank you. A couple of things. You reminded me, of course, I feel like I want to be able to just like grab everything in my brain and just transmit it. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about when we talk about this being a place for all, another theme that has come up is the idea of it being multi-generational, so that there are the opportunities that the kids can come down and play. And I think we see that maybe even in two different ways. There's the actual organized physical play spaces that can come in some of the, some of the structures. And then also the informal kind of play spaces. We talked about different kinds of seating, and we've got between Santa Fe and Oregon, there's 20 foot of grade change on the diagonal. And so there's going to be interesting terracing that can happen here, and you can think like a 5-year-old, think about all of us when we were 5, and, that's a playground too. So I think a combination of those, right? A kind of informal, creative play spaces for kids, but then also some of the formal ones. So that's great. Another one that you mentioned that we've talked about, but need to get it on the drawings, I think, in a more clear way. But when we talk about, this is the other thing that, especially the areas where we have terra firma, they become easier to get you. Sorry, I know, like firm, solid ground. So versus being on the deck.
Okay, got it.
With, highway underneath you. There are these bands where you have ground where you can put down, put down foundations, you can plant trees with deep roots, you can, probably easier to get utilities to and from. And so I think, we're interested in seeing where we can insert some of the supportive structures in those places as well. So I think we heard a lot about, just talked amongst our team about, some of those kiosk spaces or leasable spaces being serviced with water and power in a way that businesses could actually capitalize on that. So great.
And one of the things I did not mention that as I was looking at my notes was accessibility. I was actually a special education teacher for 10 years, and accessibility was always something that I, had to advocate about during that time, whether it's, things being wheelchair accessible making sure that all the playscapes are, all of the, you know, areas people can navigate and are accessible to all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I do want to highlight that we have preliminarily we identified as one of the metrics that we want to measure success on.
The inclusivity is clearly important in kind of all of those bands, right?
Maggie, I think there was a hand up on.
Oh, sorry. Gosh.
Oh, online.
Angelica.
Yeah.
Sure. I just wanted to, I don't know, agree with the last speaker. I feel like there wasn't enough, or I didn't see any play areas for kids. But I also, when we talked about multi-generational, I think kind of tween teens sort of get forgotten when we do those type of spaces. We do, you know, real nice playground, but older kids want some other way to kind of move their bodies and express their bodies, and they don't always necessarily get an access to those types of structures. So if there could be something that is kind of more of that age focused as well, I think that would be really helpful as a way for them to express themselves and to move their bodies and to feel like they're part of the space instead of, you know, I think a lot about when I grew up, as well as I see a lot of signage now about don't bring your skateboards are not allowed. And those were really focused on teenage kids, that they were a problem and they were seen as sort of this entity who should not participate in these type of public spaces. They were just for certain populations. And it'd be nice to be able, I mean, by the time if this is done, by the time it'll be done, my kids will be in high school. You know, my kids are little now, but it's going to be a while before it happens. And so I know for a lot of us, we're thinking in the future that these spaces need to be available to all members of our community, elderly as well. And I know accessibility to different populations, but I think that group tends to get overlooked. So I just wanted to advocate for them. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great. Yep.
In our interviews, a lot of people were very interested in how the project was going to relate to the text dot. So I just wanted to ask the room, you know, how do you feel about the three options that are being talked about and shown here as it relates not just to the programming, but to some of the more spatial considerations of how it relates to those options?
So Zach, to your question, I thought the text dot D was the most preferable option because it minimized the displacement. I mean, again, the reason we had that separation was this, you know, this asphalt trench, right? And I thought some of their options had even more asphalt, more lanes. They love to do that. They really, I guess one of my questions is, you know, what is their requirement here? Is it how many lanes will they have to open? Because we do have space on the side. So what is their thought on that? What is the requirement? That's going to be key because we're talking about terra firma. So, I mean, if you're going to get rid of these, then you've lost some of that.
We do have, I apologize for the people online because you won't be able to see them, but we can certainly make them available as part of this. But we have sections back there that show the alternatives that TxDOT has generated. And this might help. I can also come back there and talk to you more specifically about it. But on the two that are stacked on top of each other, that's always showing the TxDOT alternative trench location compared to what exists today. To the best of our of our current information. But that kind of shows you how they align and gives you kind of an idea of where those remnant spaces exist in each configuration. So back there on the wall, there's the existing sections on the far left. And then on the two that are stacked, the top one is the alternative D overlaid on the existing and then just as itself, and you can see how many lanes are indicated there. And And then the bottom is alternative I overlaid and the number of lanes there. And they're still, they're still running their traffic forecast. What we found out from them this week is they're still running their traffic forecasts. So they're still testing, which is why, though, I think that this is timely to get this feedback and to be able to kind of put that information back out and reflect it.
But, and if I may, just to add, and to tie it back to what you were saying earlier about concerns about congestion on I-10. So TxDOT is, that's very much a driving factor for how they're looking at this project. It's concerned about addressing future congestion problems, right? So as it relates to the freeway below the deck, that's going to be their primary focus. What we are trying to work with them on is how that interfaces with the ramps that come out to the surface and how they interact with the streets at the surface level. And so we're trying to find that happy balance between enabling them to achieve their objective of allowing regional mobility, but at the same time, in a way that allows the surface road network to function in a more urban format that is accommodating not just for people who are wanting to drive through, but for all the other types of activities associated with streets, including pedestrian activity, bicycle activity, transit activity, and sort of creating a place where people want to linger, right? So that's where we are working with them, and we've got so far very positive messages from them about their willingness to talk through it as they're testing the numbers and are getting more comfortable with where there's room for maneuvering.
Yeah, you might have noticed, I'm sure Joel noticed as we discussed transportation, but on Yandell, it is like a freeway above the freeway. They have all those lanes, and it was done at a time when, the Franklin's the same way. When we had City Hall, they had all these roads speeding towards the on-ramp. So consequently, all those businesses on those streets were killed because you didn't have parking. We don't need all those lanes. If they would just put parking in, those businesses would thrive. I do have a number of things, just points I wanted to mention. I think, when we look at all these other cities, they've been very successful. Those deck parks were innovative. Okay, so I hope that we can come up, I think we have an opportunity to come up with something very special for El Paso. And maybe it involves thinking a little bit more creatively than a deck, and that everyone's doing. Because this area of our city, I would say arguably, is the most interesting part. As you're coming through, it's dynamic. You're seeing some interesting historic architecture. You're starting to see the mountain as you're coming eastbound. Because it's a trench, it's always been difficult for people, even if they're interested, to kind of, they kind of can tell there's something going on here. Maybe it's the core, bigger buildings, but it's hard to get on. So it's always been, I mentioned this at the last meeting we had that was online, the Visitors Bureau or the destination department that tries to attract people to our city. If we were able to use this in such a way that it is visually interesting rather than a big tunnel, which I don't think is interesting, and I know many people, there are people that get a lot of anxiety going through tunnels. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's a real positive image of hitting El Paso in the most interesting spot and being in a dark tunnel. I'm thinking about the people under. Of course, we're talking about what's going on top. And I think holistically, if we could think of an entire, because that's so important to a community like ours. We are so low in Texas on our income, average, our household income. And if we can just attract people through tourism dollars, of course, restaurants, hotels, everything just benefits from that with, less of a taxing on infrastructure. So I hope we can think in those regards. And I don't think the tunnel gets us there. I know I work so much with the city. I'm probably the biggest paid employee of this place, but you know, I know Parks and Rec can't keep up with the parks they have. We also don't use the parks like some other cities would use their parks because of our weather. We have winds, we have sand blowing around. We have incredible sun, very hot though. And so anyway, these big grassy areas, I don't see them as a big draw. You know, you see Sunset Heights has a park right in the middle of their neighborhood. They're very rarely used. So, you know, it's just something we have to think about. How do we, with weather and our habits, I know we can move that needle in certain ways, but I also think we have to remember, you know, there are certain elements that aren't going to change.
Yeah.
I've been presenting to some people a Ponte Vecchio idea where we cantilever off of the existing. It becomes an access point to the startup, smaller, and that's something that we need to, if we really want to generate, instead of big super blocks, we want to generate pedestrian flow. I think it's a win-win for a lot of reasons on that, and it could be so interesting if the people under the road can look up and see something great there. You know, we have the new Children's Museum. Again, that's another opportunity to cantilever over with, you know, interesting spaces. There could be another area that's a garden. Maybe all through this, it could be a walking area. So people, you know, we have art, we have health initiatives at the city to get people walking. Talking, you know, even at night where you could light up these things, it's not under a tunnel, but yet you've got, maybe you have some decking, but it's not complete blackness. But imagine going through a space that is dynamic, and then at night it gets lit up with beautiful, you know, lighting on trees, and you could see pathways, and you're going to go, what in the world's this? We're the bridge to Mexico, right? Let's exemplify that through our architecture. But let's speak to the people below as well as above. Let's do it holistically. Again, we're the Sun City, and if they hit the Sun City and they're in darkness, that makes no sense. It's not even funny.
I think there are a lot of great content in there. Can I just repeat a couple of things for here? You know, I think the concern about the experience of people coming in on the highway is really important. I think, you know, there are multiple opportunities. Obviously, we're here studying tech feasibility, but I think, you know, again, with the safety and with your comment about what that experience feels like, I think we need to not neglect those approaches and understand, you know, the entries and exits and how those can be celebrated. We also, one of the things with this feasibility is to also understand things like ventilation and light down into that space, and maybe those are opportunities to do some of that very sort of interactive, artistic, light-based kinds of things. The other thing that you talked about, and I do want to be clear, like when we indicated the areas of Deck Plaza, the intention is not for lawn. Those are all programmable spaces. And I think that's a real opportunity because I think your point about where they're not used in other places is totally understandable. We've seen about 5 different seasons in the 3 days we've been here, including snow, which I was not prepared for. But I know the heat and the sun can be real detractors to people being there. And so we've been researching a lot on the kinds of structures that can actually take advantage of the wind. There are great examples throughout time of wind scoops that actually pull in the air and cool it in the process and essentially do a kind of natural air conditioning. So are there places to do that where they're also iconographic and they tie into El Paso's unique architecture and they sit at the ends of these spaces and they can be seen from the I-10 approach and they can be seen from the Plaza space. You know, how do those get put in? I think your idea about the Ponte Vecchio is obviously fantastic. I mean, love it, great. but the idea of activating those bridges, and that's some of the revenue generation opportunities. And we certainly looked at like the deck in Columbus, the CAP, that has done something very much like that, a very kind of limited footprint that makes that feel just like the street. So I think those are all very much sort of in line with this idea of transforming that space. But I take your points.
Just one more comment. I think Boston did something around there. They have a project, a recent project that kind of meanders along the river. And of course, San Antonio's done that too. Why don't we think about, I mean, of course, you can't really see much of the river here, but maybe we think about conceptually I-10 as being the river. And so, you know, of course, we have to mitigate the sound, but there are tools for that, as you guys are probably aware. But let's kind of think about that theme. And bridges.
Joaquin?
Maggie, there's a couple people online who've had their hands up. So Stephanie, we'll start with you and then we'll go back to Angelica.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to echo, I completely agree with everything that Suzanne just said. And it's really exciting that you all have found option 1A, working with TxDOT's option D. I think that, you know, it's terrific you've come up with an option that people in the neighborhoods are already very concerned because I-10 did divide the city. That's one of the things that you've heard in so much feedback. And it's so great that this option doesn't increase the damage that's been done by I-10 and is a way to mend it and to really connect these neighborhoods without taking additional properties. One of the properties is one that we manage, of course. It's the one with the mural on the corner of Santa Fe. I'm sure you guys have seen it in your walkthroughs. And I just wanted to mention, in your drawing, you were showing where there are entrances to the buildings, so that none of the buildings have entrances facing the future deck park. And I just wanted to point out that every single apartment in that building does in fact already face where the future deck park would be. So I think that's really exciting. That would already, you know, contribute to creating the environment you guys are seeking. And we also talked a lot about authenticity the last time. And I just wanted to, this might not be interesting to anyone but me, but I just have to put it out there. The mural on the side of that building, you know, we did that because I had just moved back to El Paso and I was a member of the Public Art Committee. And we had talked about all of these concepts we're talking about now, like placemaking and the importance of art in establishing that a place is important. And the community has really embraced that mural. It's been so satisfying to us. It shows up in El Paso's promotional videos made by the city. And, you know, basically, I mean, it's been everywhere. It's been in The Guardian. It's been all over the place. And, you know, we're so pleased that we've been able to contribute to the revitalization of El Paso. I'm, you know, born and raised here, moved back here, and have been so excited to become a part of the community. And to see this project move forward and just, you know, further all of the things that everybody who's moved back, that we had such bad brain drain for such a long time and people had really low self-esteem about El Paso. But I think so many of us have said, you know, this is a fantastic place. It's so special. And all of us have moved back because we love El Paso. And so I think that, especially with Suzanne's idea and your guys' concept of 1A, us being the bridge to Latin America, us being the bridge to Mexico, the bridges being literally the bridges, it's really exciting. And I think you guys are absolutely on the right track. And I think you guys have done such a great job of finding a solution that everybody can get excited about in the city. So thank you. I'm just really happy.
Thanks for that feedback.
Are there more?
Angelica.
More online?
Angelica, you had your hand up?
I did. I just wanted to push back on the notion that El Pasoans don't use their parks, because that really got to me. That made me a little upset. I actually live across the street from Mundy Park, and Mundy Park is used from the moment the sun comes up to the moment the sun comes down. Whether that's people walking their dogs or kids running to the park after school or after being picked up from preschool, or elderly people doing their walk, or people running. We see international students playing cricket, playing soccer, playing basketball. It's used all the time. So, and I think it's a disservice to say that El Pasoans don't use their green space. I think the problem is that El Paso has been starved for green space. If you look at the east side of El Paso, developers were not required to put in the parks that we were used to closer to the center of the city. And just in Sunset Heights, we have we have 4 parks just in one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. And I think the lack of green space is one of the biggest problems in El Paso. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a lawn. I know they're calling it a lawn, but it doesn't mean it's an expanse of green grass. But if you go to UTEP and you see the changes from what was parking space and a through street to walkable space with a large green space that's terraced and integrated with the university, you can see what a difference just that little area. That is a similar project here at the Deck Park that will be connecting parts of the city, creating a green space, a place for people to come together. I just really want to push back on that idea that El Pasoans don't use their parks. They do. They just wish they had more of them and they were located closer to where they live. Thank you.
I do have, if I may, unless there's another one online, is there anything else?
No, that's it.
Your question was, do you think that, what have you gotten right? I think you hit, if I describe it as a musical symphony you were putting together, you've hit the right notes. I just don't know in what order and how it'll go, but I think you have. I will speak to the amenities and the design because it's not really something that I'm strong in, but I think we'll get a lot of ideas and you'll hear a lot of that. My question, and I want to underline the congestion and parking, having really struggled with that right now, when there's an event at the ballpark at the same time that there is a concert at Abraham Chavez or something else, it is a nightmare to find parking and to get through downtown. So it's not like it works now. So that needs to be addressed, and this is a chance to be able to address that. And of course, parking is related to that. My question comes back to, or the central point I have is really, I'd be interested in hearing more about some of the ideas that you have for contributing to the cost, to the maintenance of this on an ongoing basis, how that will happen, what the revenue side is. And then on the other, the management and the governance of the space, of the property. I think that is critical. And I think it should be a public-private kind of arrangement. That's just thinking out loud what I think it should be. But I think that's really critical for many reasons. People will want to know, how is this going to be managed?
Great. So you mentioned 3 points, I think. One was about parking and dealing with the parking challenges that already exist and in the context of a successful space. You also talked about operation and management and revenue generation associated with that. And the third was governance. So the first one of those items, as Maggie mentioned before, one of our colleagues, Joel, has already begun to think about that. And it's too early for us to come up with any solutions just yet, but one important thought that we have is it's important to think about the deck in the context of the larger downtown environment and not just think about that in isolation. And so we really do want to think about that from the standpoint of not only how do you utilize as much of existing spaces as we have, but also think about it from a management perspective so that spaces can be used efficiently. Right, so those are preliminary thoughts about it. The revenue generation and governance, really, really important questions. Absolutely something we're going to be looking at, but it's a little further down in the process.
We'll keep coming back to it. I think you may have seen in the metrics that, the cost and, the feasibility are really tied, I think, to how that gets managed and maintained long-term. We did talk to TxDOT about sort of ownership and, who owns the right of way and what that would look like and what that could look like. So, I think there's a lot of agreements probably ultimately to hash out with that. But it's critical. I think it's because the point that I take from that, and I think we'll have to keep reminding the team of this, or I think we constantly reminding ourselves, is that, the job isn't done when it's installed. That's going to be a big enough task unto itself. But for so many of these significant public spaces, public resources like this, it's the ongoing operations and maintenance that really make the difference. And we're talking about things that are going to require programming and they're going to require diligence. I think your points about safety were good. So I think, we'll continue to flesh out those ideas, track them, and hopefully come up with some good some good options for that.
Can I add just something that came up in the interviews too, and I know as part of what will be examined is the ongoing leadership throughout programming too. You know, just understanding that the community college is so close, for example, that there are organizations like the Hispanic Chamber that work a lot with small business incubation and different things like that. So I think there's like a lot of community assets that could be brought to bear as well. And I think that's an interesting and important opportunity there too.
Yes. Just to make a comment real quick, if TxDOT is able to do their job as far as eliminating the congestion, and be able to maintain traffic flow at 68 miles an hour, okay? If your deck is only 3,000 feet long, it'll take less than 40 seconds to get through there. And the analogy that I'm making is we own property in Cloudcroft. My wife and I go up there every 2 weeks. If you've ever been there, you have to go through a tunnel as you get closer to Cloudcroft. You got this beautiful scenery. You go 15 seconds into the tunnel, come out, again, beautiful scenery. And actually people look forward to going through the tunnel. So.
A little counterpoint about tunnels there?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is, 40 seconds is not, you're not going to lose any of it, in my opinion.
My hometown is in Pittsburgh. If anybody's been to Pittsburgh, it's one of the greatest city entries through the tunnel because you don't even see downtown until you get to the other side.
Going to New York is the same thing.
Yeah. No, but
Think about, I've been to Pittsburgh, beautiful.
Yeah.
You guys have done a great job really getting it, developing. But think about, again, that's a beautiful thing when you come out and it's like you see the city and it's not going to be that. You're going to see in your rearview mirror, you're going to see downtown El Paso and you're going to be on your way. We have billboards all over I-10. It's just not, it's not like, it's not greenery. It's not mountains. It is what it is. That's why I'm saying this is our moment to be interesting.
Think perspectives. Were there any more comments online?
Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just wrap up first. Just thank you so much to the team. I'm really impressed with how much they got done in a short period of time. And also, I know they listened a lot and we still have a lot. I mean, I think we heard some really great input tonight of things that, clearly need to be included. There were a lot of key words like safety, we heard, parking, I think we heard multiple. So they need to, when we have those goals, those words that need to kind of appear, things for children and youth at those teens and tweens and all ages and
all ages. Yeah.
Really, really great feedback. So I think the next step for us is to get a copy of this and we'll post it online, but share it back with you all. And then you have access to this team. So as you have thoughts as they go back and dive deeper into these potential alternatives, the next steps would be our next meeting on the 17th of April.
It is the 17th.
17th of April. We'll be here and online. And then we'll have, we'll figure out the public meeting strategy. I know we really want to take the presentation to more people. So we'll reach out to city council people to go to their meetings so that we are as accessible as we possibly can be. And then that next public meeting, could be a bigger, more interactive forum in a single place versus spread over the city. So, any thoughts that you might have about the right way to do that, we really welcome the feedback.
And if I might add just a little bit more in the context of the upcoming meetings, based on the work we've started now, we're going to be spending the next month or so developing these alternatives further. And so the next time we come back to see you, we'll be showing them fleshed out in more detail, hopefully reflecting what we've heard from you. And also, we would have taken a first attempt at beginning to compare these alternatives to each other so that we can help inform a good decision about how to move forward.
Great. So to everyone in person and online, thank you so much. And we look forward to staying in touch. See you soon. And please drive safely.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.